Rahim. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. ما أحمده حمدا أحمد محمدا حمادا حمد المحمود لحصول الثناء من الحمود الحامد حميدا وبعد. Today, as you all know, has been a much anticipated night, not only for you all, but for myself as well. It's indeed Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi. He's a individual who kind of misunderstood, especially in the West. And we're going to kind of get into the reason why. But before I speak about his life, I just want to start this night off by a couplet of his where he says, آدمی مخفیش در زیر زبان این زبان پرده است بر درگاه جان. So he says human beings are concealed underneath their tongues. These tongues are the curtain of an individual's soul or of an individual's heart. So based on what a person says, we can see where that person's heart stands. Okay, so why did I choose to start this night off with this beautiful couplet? I would like to thank a few individuals. First, obviously, I would like to thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our creator. Without him, this would not be possible. Without the tawfiq and ability, nothing would be possible. And the second group of people I would like to thank is this beautiful Afghan Student Association team. The Prophet, peace be upon him, he says, مَنْ لَا يَشْكُرُ النَّاسِ لَا يَشْكُرُ اللَّهِ. Whoever cannot show gratitude to the people will never be able to show gratitude to Allah, to the Creator. So I just want to thank every single one of them. The work they are doing is amazing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them, and may Allah bless you all. So now, based on this, we'll begin our night, inshallah. So Mawlana, he begins, he says, حاصل عمرم سه سخن پیش نیست. حاصل عمرم سه سخن پیش نیست. خام بودم، پخته شدم، سوختم. He says, my life can be summarized by three very straightforward and easy phrases. He says, I was first kham, I was unripe, I wasn't cooked. This was the first phase of his life. Then he says, pukhta shudam. Then I became cooked. Then I became ripe. And the third phase of my life, sokht, I burnt. Okay, so scholars, when they speak about these three phases, they say from the time he was born until the age of about 25, this was the age, this is the time frame where he was kham. He wasn't cooked yet. He was unripe. And then the ages from ages 25 to 39, this was the time where he was cooking. He became ripe. And we're going to speak about the details to why he mentions this about these portions of his life. And the final portion of his life, from 39 till about, obviously, the day he passed away, he says, Sokhtam, I burnt. So we're going to speak about why he uses these specific words, but inshallah ta'ala, we'll get right into it with the first phase of his life. So, his name is Jalaluddin Muhammad. Okay, this was his given name, Jalaluddin Muhammad, the son of Bahauddin Muhammad. Okay, or some individuals call his father Baha Walad. Whatever the case is, his name was Jalaluddin Muhammad. His father's name is Bahauddin Walad. He was born in the city of Balkh, or in the province of Balkh. There's a difference in opinion to where exactly he was born in regards to what part of Balkh. But what's known and what's agreed upon, it's the province is known, the province of Balkh, which is in modern day Afghanistan. He was born in the year 1207 or 604 Hijri, depending on the calendar one wants to use. So Balkh at this time was part of the Khwarezmian dynasty. And these individuals, they had a very vast portion of land underneath their control. All of Persia was underneath their control, and from Iran, modern day Iran, to most of Afghanistan was under their control, to the borders of to the borders of Iraq as well. And this is the the time he was born. And as you guys remember, I don't know if you guys remember the last time we spoke, Shaykh Sa'di rahimahullah, he was also born around this time as well. So this time was a very turbulent era. There was a lot of trials and tribulations around the world, wars happening and massacres and genocide. It was a very difficult era to live in. So this was the era Jalaluddin Rumi, or Balkhi rahimahullah, was born in. And Balkh at that time was a hub of knowledge. Some of the greatest libraries in the world at that time existed in Balkh, in Herat, in these areas and so forth. And many great scholars were alive and living at that time in these areas. One of those great scholars were his father. His father, Bahauddin Muhammad, was a giant in his own right. He was known amongst his people in Balkh as Sultanul Ulama, meaning the leader of the scholars, the king of the scholars. So this was a title he was given in Balkh, and this title actually carried on when he went to modern-day Turkey, Konya as well. His father had many students, many disciples. His mother's name, scholars say his mother's name was Mu'mina, and they come from a very long lineage of scholars. If you look down the lineage of the mother and father of Mawlana Jalaluddin al-Balkhi, many great scholars were in this family tree. Some people say that from his mother's side, he was related to the first Khalifa of Islam, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. But this is heavily disputed. Nobody can say this for sure. Some other scholars say that rather there was a great scholar in his mother's lineage known by the name of Abu Bakr. So some people confuse this Abu Bakr with the first Khalifa. But what's known for sure is that down their family tree, many great scholars. Okay, so what's the reason? Why did they leave Balkh? So this is a question that must be answered. I'm sure most of you probably know the reason why. One of the reasons is obviously the Mongols, right? The Mongols at that time were just wreaking havoc around the world. They were destroying cities and leveling cities. It's mentioned that any city they would go to, they would make sure there were no buildings higher than their horses. They would literally just annihilate everything. They would kill all the inhabitants, not only the human beings. We spoke about this. They would also kill the dogs and cats of these cities. They were savage. So one of the reasons to why it's mentioned that Bahauddin Muhammad, the father of Mawlana, left Balkh with his family was because of this great fitna and this great trial that was coming towards them. Other people say that this was not the reason. Rather, there was a lot of conflict between his father and other local scholars. Other local scholars were feeling, they had some jealousy inside their heart. And because of this, his father felt a little, unsafe for him and his family to live there. And one thing about jealousy I want to mention, the scholars say that jealousy, in the Islamic tradition, they say that jealousy was the first sin to ever be committed in the heavens and the first sin to ever be committed on the face of this earth. In the heavens, they say that Iblis, Satan, he showed jealousy towards Prophet Adam when God commanded Iblis to prostrate before Adam. He said, no, khalaqtani min nar, he said, you created me from fire, wa khalaqtahu min teen. You created me from fire and you created him from soil. I'm superior. I'm not gonna bow to this guy, right? So this is what scholars say. Because of the jealousy he had for Adam alayhi salam, he did not prostrate to Adam. And in regards to the first sin being committed on this earth, scholars say that it was in regards to Cain and Abel, or Habil and Qabil, the sons of Adam, when one son of Adam murdered the other son of Adam because of the jealousy that one son had over his brother, right? So hasad, the word in Arabic is hasad. And one beautiful thing about the Arabic language is that there is a wajhut tasmiya, and even in Farsi and Persian, there's a wajhut tasmiya for why everything is called what it is. So for example, the word hasad, scholars say, Ibn Mandur, the great linguist in his great dictionary, Lisan al-Arab, he says the word hasad comes from the word hasdal. Hasdal, ha, sin, dal, lam. Hasdal means, it means a flea or a tick. A flea or a tick. So whenever a flea or a tick, whenever it, invades the body of an animal, what happens? The animal can't stop scratching that area the fleas have infested, right? Like so, and the more that animal scratches that area, the more that wound will increase. The more that wound will increase. So scholars say, like so, when it comes to jealousy, hasad, whenever hasad befalls a person's heart, the more a person feeds that jealousy, the more their heart will be destroyed. This is why scholars say the word hasad, jealousy, comes from the word hasdal, which means a flea or a tick. So now, between the years 1215 and 1220, the father of Jalaluddin, and we're going to get to his laqab and his title at the end, inshallah, they left the area of Balkh, okay? And it's disputed to what cities and what areas they went to exactly, but one thing for sure was that their destination at the end was modern-day Turkey, Anatolia at that time, Konya, okay? And this area of Anatolia was a part of the dominion and the rule of the Seljuk Empire, the Salajiqa. And we spoke about the Seljuks during our Saadi lecture as well. Shiraz, parts of Iran, were also under the control of the Seljuks during Sheikh Saadi's time as well. And Sheikh Saadi and Mawlana Balkhi Rumi, rahmatullahi alayhima, they were both contemporaries. They lived in the same era, but there's no proof of them ever meeting. So it's mentioned that his father took them to Samarkand, which is in modern-day Uzbekistan, and then they went to Nishapur, which is in modern-day Iran. And then over here, it's mentioned that between either him going to Nishapur or Iraq, it's mentioned that he met two great individuals, two extremely profound luminaries of not only the Muslim world, but of the world generally. Two great individuals. One being the great Ibn al-Arabi, Muhyiddin Ibn al-Arabi, and the other was the great Fariduddin Attar. These two individuals, they played a huge role in the life of Mawlana, especially the individual Fariduddin Attar. He was a great poet in his own right. He obviously lived in modern-day Iran, Nishapur. And he had many books of poetry that still exist today. You have his Mantiq al-Tayr, it has been translated, many great works he has written. So it's mentioned that Fariduddin Attar, he met the father and Mawlana himself, Jalaluddin, when they passed through Iran, they passed through Nishapur. And it's mentioned that Fariduddin Attar, he told the father of Mawlana, take care of this boy. He's going to be something special in the future. He gave him special pieces of advice that take care of him. He's going to be an individual that's going to take the world by storm. And this goes to the science of physiognomy. Physiognomy, or in Arabic, it's known as ilm al-firasa. It's the type of science that not too many people in today's day and age really possess, but it's that science that when you look at somebody, you can tell how they are or how they're going to be. It's a God-given ability, it's something quite astonishing. So it's mentioned that Fariduddin Attar, the great Fariduddin Attar, he had this science mastered. So when he looked at Mawlana, he just knew that this boy, he's gifted and he's going to be something great in the future. It's also mentioned that when they passed through Iraq, when they were passing through the city of Baghdad, Ibn al-Arabi, Muhyiddin Ibn al-Arabi, the great scholar and the great poet himself, he was there, and he saw Mawlana walking with his father. And he told his students, he asked his students, he said, who is that man walking with that young boy? And then his students, the students of Ibn al-Arabi, said that, that's Bahauddin Muhammad with his son Jalaluddin Muhammad. So then Ibn al-Arabi, it's mentioned, again, the science of physiognomy, ilm al-firasa, a God-given ability. He told his students that I see a ocean, I see a sea followed by an ocean. I see a sea, referring to the father of Mawlana, followed by an ocean, referring to Mawlana himself. Again, these people, they saw Mawlana at such a young age, and they just knew, and indeed he was an individual who took the world by storm. And specifically in regards to Fariduddin Attar, rahimahullah, Mawlana speaks a great amount about him in his Mathnawi. He has many, ghazals and many poems and many dastans where he actually gives commentary on the poetry of Fariduddin Attar. So he mentions about the great Fariduddin Attar. He says, Haft shahri ishqa Attar gasht, ma hanuz andar khamiyak kuche. He says the great Fariduddin Attar, he has walked the 7 cities, the 7 countries of love. We are here still stuck on the first turn of an alley. But Fariduddin Attar, he has already walked this entire country and the 6 other countries of love as well, right? So going to the concept of some scholars, they say that the Quran has different layers. The Quran has different layers. So Mawlana was referring to Fariduddin Attar having great knowledge of the Quran, and he knew the Quran by heart, and not only by heart, but he knew the sciences within it as well. So he greatly and extremely praised him. So Allama Fariduddin Attar rahimahullah, he died, and actually he got killed by the Mongols in Nishapur in the year 1220. So after this, after going through Uzbekistan, going through Iraq, going through Iran, Bahauddin, the father of Mawlana, they went for Hajj, it's mentioned. And this is agreed upon amongst all historians that they went for the Islamic pilgrimage of Hajj. And after this, after they completed their Hajj, they went to the city of Karaman, which is in modern day Turkey. And this is the city where Mawlana got married. Jalaluddin, Mawlana, he got married, and this is where he had his children and so forth. After going to Karaman, it's mentioned that, and they were in Karaman for about 6 years. And it's quite interesting, actually. If you go to Karaman today, the descendants of Mawlana still live today, and they still have that, that shajara, this shajara and they say that tree, that family tree, they still have it today, and they're quite proud of that, showing people that, look, our bloodline goes up to the great Mawlana. So it's quite interesting. This is in modern day Karaman. So they stayed there for about 6 years. Then around the year 1228, the Suljuq leader at that time, his name was Alauddin Qayqubad. Okay, Alauddin Qayqubad. It's mentioned that he invited the father of Mawlana, Bahauddin Muhammad, he invited him to Konya to come and, you can say, continue his teachings there and run the madaris there and open up a school there, and just basically in easy English, be the grand mufti or the grand scholar of the empire. Okay, so this is when they made the move to Konya, right? So, and this area, the area of Anatolia, 200 years, around 200 years roughly, before Mawlana and before Bahauddin Muhammad, before they all moved to Konya, it was run by the Byzantine Empire. Okay, it was considered a part of Eastern Rome, this area, 200 years before, going to the concept of why he's called Rumi by most Westerners, and not only Westerners, most people in today's age. We're going to get to that, though, at the end of the first lecture, though, inshallah. So he invited his father, and his father came, and he established the school, and he became one of the head teachers of the empire in Konya, of the Salajiqa, of the Suljuqs. And by this time, while all this was happening, Mawlana's father was grooming him, teaching him the Islamic sciences, whether it was tafsir, fiqh, hadith, Arabic, Aristotle, law, all the different sciences at that time. Mawlana's father was slowly but surely teaching him and grooming him for what? For one day Mawlana being the individual to take over that work he began in Konya. So this is where the you can say the Pukhtagi Sharoshid, the cooking of Mawlana began. The cooking of Mawlana began around this time, where his father began to teach him and teach him the sciences and so forth. So now, in the year 1231, it's mentioned that his father passed away. And a few years after the passing of his father, but one thing to note is that when his father passed away, Mawlana, he took the position of his father in Konya and in the empire. So how it worked at that time was that whenever there was a question that needed answering, in a certain area, the question was given to the grand mufti or the grand scholar of that area. So Mawlana's father, he was that individual. But when he passed away, Mawlana himself took that position. So now he was the grand mufti per se, or the grand scholar of the entire area. Any single question that came, Mawlana was there to answer. So he was the Arabic word is faqih. He was a great jurist of the Hanafi fiqh. So After his father passed away, it's mentioned that one of his father's students, his name was Burhanuddin Muhaqqiq Tirmidhi, from the city of Tirmidh. It's mentioned that one of the students of his father, he came to Qunya with the intention of visiting Bahauddin, the father of Mawlana. He was, again, this man was the student of Bahauddin, the student of Mawlana's father. So he came to Qunya, and when he came to Qunya, he noticed that his father had passed away. He noticed that his teacher had passed away. So upon arriving and realizing this, Burhanuddin Muhaqqiq, he took Mawlana under his reins. He began to groom Mawlana even more. Began to teach him in great detail all the other sciences, and the sciences he already knew, but he taught it in a much more greater detail. And it's also mentioned that Burhanuddin Muhaqqiq Tirmidhi, he actually sent Mawlana to Damascus to study for 4 or 5 years. And it's mentioned that over here as well, we mentioned how we met Ibn al-Arabi, or Ibn al-Arabi saw him when he was young. It's also mentioned that there's a very high probability and chance that Mawlana sat in the circles and the gatherings of Ibn al-Arabi in Syria, in Damascus, when he went there. Okay, so that's why you see that there's a lot of similar teachings of Ibn al-Arabi and of Mawlana. When you analyze their books and compare their books, there's a lot of similar teachings between themselves. So now it's also mentioned that one of the great students of Ibn al-Arabi, his name was Sadruddin al-Qunawi, who's actually buried in Qunya today, not too far from where Mawlana is buried. He was one of the grand students of Ibn al-Arabi, and he was based in Qunya. So when Mawlana came back to Qunya after 4 or 5 years, it's mentioned that Mawlana and Sadruddin al-Qunawi, the great student of Ibn al-Arabi, they used to have many dialogues. And because of these many dialogues, Mawlana, he learned many of the teachings of Ibn al-Arabi. Because again, Sadruddin al-Qunawi, it's mentioned that he was one of the, if not the greatest student of Ibn al-Arabi, rahimahullah ta'ala. So he came back after his studies in Damascus, and it's mentioned that Burhanuddin Muhaqqiq Tirmidhi passed away in the year 1240, around there. But Mawlana continued to grow, right? Mawlana continued to grow. He continued to do, the Arabic word is tahqiq. He continued to do his research. He continued to read. He continued to, and it's mentioned that Mawlana was not, he was not an individual who mastered 1 or 2 sciences. All the sciences of his time, he knew it. Whether it was fiqh, tafsir, Quran, hadith, even logic, even philosophy. Like he would be quoting Aristotle and Socrates like it was nothing. He was a great scholar. But he continued after Burhanuddin Muhaqqiq passed away. And it's mentioned that he felt incomplete. He read so much, he always thought that there was a lapse or a gap in his knowledge, because he felt this, this gap inside his heart. He's like, I'm not getting content. Aram nabud. There was no sakina or tranquility within him. So he kept reading and reading, thinking that these books are going to quench his thirst or fill that void and gap inside his heart. But that was far from it. So, you can say that he had an epiphany when the great Shamsuddin Tabrizi came into his life. So it's mentioned in the year 1244, the great Shamsuddin, or as individuals know him today as just Shams Tabriz, he came into the life of Mawlana. And this individual, he literally changed the life of this great individual. We're gonna talk about some of the poetry Mawlana uses himself, describing what happened to him when he met Shams. Anyway, there's so many stories to the first encounter. I don't know if a lot of you are probably acquainted with the story of Mawlana and Shams. There are so many stories to that first encounter and what happened. And me, myself, I read probably 4 or 5 different stories of that first encounter and what happened. A lot of them share the same element, but a lot of scholars, they dispute these stories. So I'll give you guys an example. One of the stories I read was that Mawlana was sitting with many of his books, and Shams, he comes and he asks Mawlana, and he says, what are these? And again, Shams, he comes, in a very unkept manner. He's not wearing the nicest of clothing. He's a traveler. So he comes and he asks Mawlana what these books are. And Mawlana, he answers, he says, he looks at Shams, he says, it's something you don't understand. And then it's mentioned, there's two stories. So one of the stories here, it's mentioned that Mawlana, after he says this, Shams gets these books and he throws it inside a body of water, a small little spring or a small little fountain that's there. And then when Mawlana sees this, he runs to get these books so his books don't get wet. And when he takes these books out of the water, none of the books are wet. Ajib. And then he asks Shams, he says, what is this? What happened? And then Shams answers, it's something you don't understand. So he answered with the exact same answer. So, I mean, this is one of the many stories, but most scholars say that rather they met inside the marketplace of Konya. And Mawlana, he was craving somebody. And it's mentioned that Mawlana was craving somebody. And Shams was also craving a disciple. So when they saw one another in the marketplace of Konya, their eyes just locked and they were just looking at each other. And it's mentioned that they just knew that, this was a meeting that was destined by the Almighty God. And indeed, their meeting lasted a great effect, until today. Scholars say that if Mawlana, if he would have never met Shams, God knows if that legacy would still exist today. God knows if, he would have the ability and inspiration to, just let out and gush forward so many thousand verses of poetry, right? Scholars dispute this, but no one knows exactly what would have happened. But this is where the phase of burning begins. Sohtan. He burns in the presence and in the aura of Shams. And again, it triggers something that they start spending hours together. It's actually mentioned that when they first met, they spent 40 days straight together. And no one knows exactly, and a lot of people say, and Mawlana even mentions in his Mathnawi as well, that, I'm not going to share with you exactly what happened. Not too many people know exactly what happened, but those 40 days, especially in the beginning, had a huge effect on him. And I mean, he describes it himself in the Diwan-e-Shams. And again, the Diwan-e-Shams is another collection of his poetry, about 40,000 verses. So he says, مرده بودم زنده شدم گریه بودم خنده شدم دولت عشق آمد و من دولت پاینده شدم. He says about this first meeting of when he met when he met Shams, he says, I was dead. مرده بودم زنده شدم. I was dead. When I met him, I became alive. He installed life into my heart. Then he says, گریه بودم خنده شدم. I was crying. I was so stressed out. I was so depressed. But when I met him, I started to laugh again. He says, دولت عشق آمد و من دولت پاینده شدم. He says that the dominion of love came. Meeting him showed me what love is. And that made my dominion everlasting and forever. Then he goes and he continues. He says, زیر و زبر عشقم شمس الحق تبریز است. جان را ز پی عشقش جان را ز پی عشقش من زیر و زبر گیرم. He says زیر و زبر. He uses the words of زیر و زبر here, which means Mawlana or Shams, he literally, I was living my life upside down. He made me right side up. He kept flipping me over and over and over again. And this was because of the love he had for God. And he installed that same love inside me. I was living my life backwards. Shams is the one that made me live right side up. Then he goes and he says, چون حدیث روی شمس الدین رسید شمس چارم آسمان سر در کشید واجب آید چون که آمد نامی او شرح کردن رمزی از انعام او. He goes and he says, when news of my Shamsuddin first came, when I first met my Shams, he says, the heaven's highest sun. So Shamsuddin literally means the sun of religion, right? So he uses the word sun here. He says, when I first met my son, my Shams, so when I first met my son, the heaven's highest sun, it withheld and withdrew in shame. This is how great my son and my Shamsuddin is. He said, I am now compelled through uttering Shams's name. Like I'm now compelled to tell you about him, to tell you his gifts and to spread his fame. And it's quite interesting. I mean, there's so many lines of poetry Mawlana uses in describing Shams. I mean, that's going to take away from our main lecture after this short intro we're giving. But Shams, literally, the concept that is used is tahdeeb. Tahdeeb literally means it means to teach. A muhaddib is somebody who teaches. But literally, it means to trim or cut. To trim or cut a bush. So a teacher, what happens when a real teacher, when a muhaddib comes into a student's life, they are literally trimming them and perfecting them. So Shams was that muhaddib who trimmed him and made him perfect and made him who he was today and who he is remembered as today. So now, it's mentioned that when these two individuals started spending more time together, the students of Mawlana, and again I mentioned that Mawlana, before Shams came into his life, he was a great teacher and a great scholar. It's mentioned that he had gatherings of over 10,000 students. So those students of Mawlana started to become very jealous. Jealousy, again, we spoke about jealous, what it can lead a person to do. Whenever a person is feeling jealousy, one of the cures for jealousy, the Prophet, peace be upon him, he mentions this. He says one of the cures for hatred, one of the cures for jealousy is to pray for that person you have hatred or jealousy for. Pray for them. Make dua for them. Make dua and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, ask God to give them the best of everything, the best of this world. And the more you do that, the more this jealousy or hatred will be removed from your heart. So now these students, they started to get really jealous. They're like, this guy, who is this guy? This guy looks like, looks all, unclean and unkept. Our teacher's not even teaching us anymore. So they started to show a lot of enmity and animosity towards Shams. And Shams himself, he started to notice this. So these individuals, it's mentioned that these are the individuals who drove Shams away. They drove Shams away. And the one thing that's quite interesting is when they did drive him away, Mawlana's condition became very bad, that to a point where these students, they regretted making Shams run away in the first place. They're like, it's now even worse. Now he's not talking to us at all. They started to regret it. Anyways, what happened was that Mawlana, he heard that Shams was in Syria, in Damascus. So he sent his son, and his son's name is Sultan Walad. His son's name is Sultan Walad. He sent Sultan Walad and a caravan of his students to go and find Shams and to bring him back and so forth. Anyways, Shams ends up coming back a year later. And this is the year 1247. But upon coming back to Qunya, nothing changed. Exact same thing. The students, they still continued to show resentment, still continued to show signs of jealousy, enmity, hatred. This time what happened was, and it's mentioned actually that the son of Sultan Walad has a book called the Walad Nama. And it's mentioned actually in the Walad Nama that before Shams left permanently, so the first time he left, he came back. The second time he left, he never came back. So it's mentioned in the Walad Nama. So Sultan Walad is narrating this. He said that before Shams left, Shams came to me and he said that I'm going to go away and I'm going to disappear to a point where Mawlana is going to think that I have been killed. So one of the narrations actually mentioned that the students of Mawlana, they killed Shams. But most of the scholars say no, he did not die and they did not kill him. Rather, he ran away and he just vanished and he left Mawlana permanently. And this is in the Walad Nama, Sultan Walad, he mentions this. What's known for sure is that this meeting of Mawlana in Shams, it transformed Mawlana. It transformed him from being a great scholar to not only a great scholar, but now a great wali. And wali is the concept used in the Islamic tradition as a friend. The word used is waliullah, a friend of God, an individual who has built such a connection to God that whoever spends time with that type of individual, whoever reads the works of those types of individuals, they're just touched by them. So this is the level, and it just goes to show that knowledge will take you somewhere. Yeah, knowledge will take you somewhere, but if there's no spirituality, And if you're not acting upon that knowledge, or if you have no, mentor or somebody to help you throughout the way, it's going to be very difficult for you to reach and attain that level of spirituality you want to be at, right? And we're going to speak about this a little, the concept of mentorship and apprenticeship and so forth. So it's mentioned that Mawlana began compiling his famous book, the Mathnawi, some 15 years after Shams's disappearance. And the Mathnawi is, you can say, Mawlana's book of life, how I like to explain it. Scholars actually call the Mathnawi the Quran in Farsi. That's one of the nicknames that they have given the Mathnawi, because for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is because it shares so many of the same teachings as the Quran, and so many of the same stories and themes. Right? The Quran speaks about all the prophets. Mawlana speaks about many of the prophets as well. And not only that, the Quran was revealed to Prophet Muhammad throughout a span of 20 some odd years. Like so, the Mathnawi, it was recited. It was recited by Mawlana to his students in a span of about 14, 15 years. So it shares this with the Quran as well. So, and again, the Mathnawi is about 26,000 verses, 26,000 to 30,000 verses, depending on the manuscript and so forth. Okay, so it's mentioned. Well, I mean, it's not really mentioned. It's a fact that Mawlana himself did not write the Mathnawi himself. It was orally recited to his students, and more specifically his student Husamuddin Chalabi, which Mawlana describes him, and he gives him the nickname in his Mathnawi as Diya'ul Haq. Diya'ul Haq literally means the light of truth. So in the Mathnawi, we see that Mawlana, he praises Husamuddin greatly. He praises him excessively. So Husamuddin was one of the individuals who actually wrote the Mathnawi by heart, and Mawlana was the individual who just literally spoke poetry. And these individuals were like that, right? They were so eloquent, and subhanAllah, they were just individuals so close to God that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally just poured things into their heart, and their tongue just continued to flow. And this is something that the scholars of the past, and not only the scholars of the past, but the people around the Prophet, peace be upon him, they would literally speak poetry. They would literally speak poetry. So one example I like to mention is during one of the battles of Khaybar. The Battle of Khaybar was one of the battles between the Muslims and the non-Muslims during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The Battle of Khaybar. It's mentioned that this battle was won by the sword of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu alayhi salam. So Ali radiyallahu anhu, he's fighting one-on-one against one of the enemies. And while he's fighting, he's reciting poetry. So the poem goes, he says, أنا الذي سمتني أمي هيدرا كليث غابات كريه المنظرة وفيهم بالصاعق للصندرة. You can imagine this. This is while a guy is fighting. Someone's trying to take your head off, and you're reciting poetry, right? So he says, أنا الذي سمتني أمي هيدرا. I'm the one who my mother used to call Haydar. My mom used to call me Lion when I was a young. كليث غابات كريه المنظرة. I'm like a lion of the desert, a very ferocious sight to the enemy. أُوفِيهِمْ بِالصَّاعِكَ لِلصَّنْدَرَةِ. I will strike you with the swiftness of my blade. And he's saying this to the guy he's fighting. These people were just eloquent. They spoke poetry. There's so many other examples. So now, one thing I wanted to mention, quite contrary to the tale of Mawlana, it's mentioned that Mawlana, after Shams left, and Mawlana kind of went crazy, and he kind of lost his marbles and so forth. But a lot of scholars, they dispute this. They say that there's actually, and there is proof that exists today, of Mawlana actually writing letters to local leaders and giving khutbahs, Friday sermons, Friday lectures and so forth, reference letters for his students to go to other parts of the dynasty to be placed as the scholar in charge and so forth. These letters still exist today. And one of his books, the Fihi Ma Fi, it's a collection of Mawlana's teachings. It's a more summarized version of the Mathnawi. This still exists today as well. His students compiled it together. And this was teachings that Mawlana would give, obviously, after Shams left his life. So Mawlana, he might have been very upset that Shams left, but he was still hushar. He still knew what was going on. He was still very aware, and he still did things, and he still did, he served the community as a great scholar and as a great leader. So now, in December of 1273, Mawlana, rahimahullah ta'ala, he passed away. And there's actually a very beautiful story when he passed away. He recites poetry. It's mentioned in the Diwan al-Shams. I wanted to mention it today, but unfortunately, we won't have time to do that. He passed away in the year 1273. So now, 2 questions before we end off this first lecture. And the second lecture, inshallah, that's where it's going to be more poetry focused. So forgive me if you guys were expecting more poetry during this first lecture. So 2 questions. Why is Mawlana known as Rumi? Rumi, right? Everyone knows Mawlana as Rumi. So I made a hint at it in the beginning of the lecture that Anatolia, about 200 years before the Seljuks conquered, it was a part of the Byzantine Empire. And that part of the empire was considered a part of Eastern Rome. Okay, it was considered a part of Eastern Rome. So Westerners today, for this reason, they refer to Mawlana as Rumi because of who Anatolia used to be conquered and used to be under the dominion of. Okay, for this reason, Westerners call Mawlana Rumi. Rum comes from the Arabic word Rum, Rome. Okay, so that's the first question. The second question is, why is he called Mawlana? So now, Mawlana is a term, even today actually, not only in the past, even today, it's used as a term referring to scholars, referring to people who study the sacred sciences. So you have a lot of people, you guys probably know, there's a lot of scholars today, they are called, Mawlana so-and-so, Mawlana this, Mawlana that. So it's a term used for scholars. So Mawlana comes from the word wali. Wali, literally, it means for somebody to be close. It also comes in the meaning of a friend, okay? So Mawlana, so Mawla means a leader, okay? Mawla means a leader. It also means master. Mawlana, when you add the pronoun at the end, Mawlana means our master or our leader, okay? But one thing that's interesting is that you don't say Mawlana without Mawlana Rumi coming into your mind first, right? You don't say Mawlana without Mawlana Rumi coming into your mind first. And you don't say the Mathnawi without the Mathnawi of Mawlana coming to your mind first. Why do I say that? The Mathnawi obviously was the name he chose for his great work. But Mathnawi is actually, it's a type of poetry. Mathnawi is a type of poetry where the first half line of the couplet or line matches in terms of the poetic wazn, the poetic scale, meter, there you go. The poetic meter of that half line matches the poetic meter of the next line. So Mathnawi is a type of poetry. So many great scholars of the past had their own Mathnawi as well. Fariduddin Attar had his Mathnawi, Jami' had his Mathnawi. Many great scholars had their own Mathnawi. But the Mathnawi of Mawlana is on another level. You don't say Mathnawi without thinking of the Mathnawi of Mawlana Jalaluddin Al-Balkhi Al-Rumi rahimahullah ta'ala. So that is you can say a small little bio of his life. And again, you can spend hours speaking about his life. Just the dialogue between him and Shams is something to really be looked into. But one thing I do recommend is that the works of Mawlana should not be studied alone. The works of Mawlana should not be studied alone. Why do I say that? Unless you know where to look, because there are a lot of translations that really do take away from the core principles of his teachings, right? I mean, there are a few really amazing translations and works out, which we'll speak about at the end, inshallah. But for anybody who does really want to study him, they should have somebody to kind of help them navigate through and really explain. Because again, one thing that people tend to forget is that Mawlana, he did not start his own religion. He did not start his own religion. He was a Muslim. He followed the religion of Islam. And everything he says in the Mathnawi is not from his own desires or his own accord. It's connected to either a verse of the Quran or a prophetic teaching or one of the companions, or this. A lot of people don't know this, right? But you have to know the actual verses by heart or the narrations of the Prophet by heart to actually make those connections, right? And we're going to speak about how some people actually think that Mawlana, he has his own religion and so forth. So this is the end of the first part, inshallah ta'ala. I hope everybody got us a good little base of who Mawlana Jalaluddin Balkhi was. And inshallah ta'ala, we'll take a little 10-minute break and then we'll continue with the second part. Jazakallahu khairan wa ahsanal jazaa. Thank you so much.